Around the time of publishing this video is the 30th anniversary of the Windows 95 operating system. This year there is also the 40th anniversary of the first Windows release and the 10th anniversary of Windows 10. So let's take a look at how Windows has gotten here. Microsoft first made a name for themselves with MS-DOS, or Microsoft Disk Operating System. It was a 16-bit command line based operating system launched in 1981 for x86 IBM PC compatibles and the most widespread choice on them throughout the 80s. Microsoft soon started looking to create a graphical interface on MS-DOS. They took note of an interface demonstrated at an expo, and at that time Apple, with whom Microsoft has had a rivalry in the years after, also already got its advanced graphical interface. Bill Gates, CEO and co-founder, showcased Windows in 1993, but it took another 2 years to release it. On the 20th of November 1985, Microsoft released the first retail edition, Windows 1.01, in the US for the price of $99. The first few Windows releases were merely graphical shells for MS-DOS, meaning you were to launch Windows from the DOS command line and then interact with the system from there. The original version 1.0 was not released to the public due to critical bugs, giving us Windows 1.01 instead. I actually found that the earliest Windows editions can be run in a browser. I leave a link down below. You are greeted with a file manager called the MS-DOS Executive, which just lists everything on the device. Here you can open any saved programs or launch applications. There already are some familiar programs: Calculator, Notepad and Paint for bitmap images. You also get a calendar for scheduling, a full-screen analog clock, and a document editor simply called Write. There is Reversi as a built-in game. The control panel is more like a system settings. You can configure the time, navigation, devices and colors. Minimized programs are displayed as an icon on the strip on the bottom. You can have multiple windows open, in which case they are tiled side by side. For menu entries, click and hold on the menu tab and release on the option. To close a program, select Close from the hamburger menu. To shut down Windows, either select Special, End Session or close the executive. This returns you to the DOS terminal. The response to Windows 1.0 was pretty modest. It didn't fully live up to expectations, being slow, subpar to Apple's GUI and having poor support for other software. It had high system requirements for the time, which might become a bit of a theme here. It also was centered around using a mouse, a new thing at that point and not nearly as widespread. Windows 1.0 paved the way for Microsoft's future, though. Windows 1.0 can be run off of 2 floppy disks on 256 kilobyte memory. It got 3 updates, adding localization for the European markets and improving drivers. The next major release, Windows 2.0, was released on December 9th, 1987, 2 years after. While pretty much keeping the look and feel, the biggest improvement was the windows now floating, meaning you could freely resize and move them around and also have them overlap. It also now had the minimize and maximize buttons. The menu bar now also works in the way we're familiar with, where you simply click on the entries. Apparently, this is the point where Microsoft Word and Excel were introduced. 2.0 was seen as a step in the right direction. It was more responsive and easier to use. There was an update named Windows 2.1 a year later to improve performance and device support, but what got the public's attention was Windows 3.0, released in May 22nd, 1990. This one had a graphical redesign, now with clickable icons to represent programs. Instead of the MS-DOS Executive, it now had Program Manager that lists programs in categories and can be closed to shut down Windows. There is Main for system management, Accessories for productive work, and Games, which now also had Solitaire. To see your files, there's now the File Manager. Paint or Paintbrush now looks like something from the XP days. Minimize programs are shown as an icon at the bottom of the desktop, which you can drag around, similarly to the desktop shortcuts that came later. Windows 3.0 was the first to be well received by critics and to be a commercial success, with highlights being the ease of use of the icon-based interface and better memory management, essential for multitasking. This was also when Microsoft started getting called out for anti-competitive practices, as the operating environment came bundled with just plenty of their own separate software. It was improved further with Windows 3.1 in April 1992. TrueType was introduced to have better control for how fonts are displayed and output, along with additional fonts. Multimedia support was greatly enhanced as a sound recorder and Windows Media Player were included, along with screensavers. File Manager included a split view between the file system tree and the included files, and it could all be on one window. There was a control panel for system configuration now. Along with hardware settings, you could change the desktop look, pick from color schemes, and manage system sounds. Windows Registry was introduced here. In the games section, Reversi was replaced with Minesweeper, known and loved by many, including me. This was the point where Windows became the most used graphical operating system. Windows 3.1 had some regional updates, with Windows 3.2 being a simplified Chinese edition. From here, Windows branched into two. They were developing the Windows NT kernel, one that would be used on Windows editions to this day. NT was initially supposed to mean new technology, before losing meaning over time and being just NT. It was July of '93 when Windows NT 3.1 was released, which was meant for high-end enterprise computers, not to be confused with just Windows 3.1. The new NT system was running independently, not on top of DOS or anything, and as such was more stable and reliable. It was 32-bit, compiled for x86 and MIPS processors. The core system, the most essential software, ran on kernel space to have more control over the system, access the hardware directly, and have better performance. Others, including user software and many device drivers, ran on user space. This way they would not have as much power, but are more secure and wouldn't bring the whole system down in the event of a device failure. To have the system portable to different processor architectures, a more general programming language, C, was used instead of x86 assembly. This resulted in higher memory usage though. Windows NT came with its own file system format, the NTFS. Windows NT 3.1 had the look and feel of Windows 3.1 with a new underlying system. Being the first in the NT line and very business-oriented, it got off to a bit of a slow start. Not a lot of software ran natively on 32-bit, and the system requirements were really high, with a whopping 16 megabytes of memory being recommended. A year after, in September, Windows NT 3.5 was released. This came in two variants, as a general workspace edition and as a server OS. They were aiming to improve the performance over the previous one, and networking and new file transfer protocols were implemented. NT 3.51 was then released in May of '95. This was supposed to work together with the consumer editions of Windows I'll get to now. Coming to home computers, 1995 was a big year for Windows. This is where it went mainstream. It was August 24th, 1995 when they released Windows 95, named of course after the year. Microsoft launched a huge ad campaign ahead of the release across all media, including a TV commercial featuring Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones. And it worked. People were lining up in retail stores to buy a copy of the new Windows, and about 1 million copies were sold in the first week alone. Windows 95 included a whole redesign. The new layout might look pretty familiar already, because the newer editions of Windows are still rooted in it. It had a taskbar that was on the bottom by default. The clock and the system tray were on the right, and the start button on the left with any running programs. The start menu was a bit plain at the time, having some system options there and letting you browse directories for other programs. Ironically, the start button can be used to stop Windows, like shut it down. The program top bar now also has the icon, title, and then minimize, maximize, close buttons. And desktop shortcut icons were introduced. Windows 95 tried to feel more welcoming with a cloud's background and introducing the startup sound, using the one I played at the start. Here, Windows was still running on MS-DOS, but they were kind of merged into one. The computer would boot into Windows and you could use DOS commands from the MS-DOS prompt. While the World Wide Web was not a big thing yet at that point, it was about to be, and Windows 95 included Microsoft Network or MSN. Windows now had 32-bit support. 32-bit file names could be up to 256 characters long, and plug and play was introduced, where you could just plug in a device and suitable drivers would be attempted to be installed automatically. Windows 95 was praised for its new interface and ease of use, though it had its stability concerns and network limitations. Windows NT 4.0 was released on August 24, 1996, and hey, that's exactly 1 year after Windows 95. Improvements included adapting the Windows 95 look to the NT base, cryptography, and the introduction of Task Manager, the tool commonly used to shut down unresponsive programs. 4.0 introduced DirectX as a standard and, in addition to games mentioned previously, came with Space Cadet Pinball. The next edition was Windows 98, which was intended to come with better hardware support using Windows driver model and the better plug and play support, as demonstrated by Bill Gates and his assistant in this legendary clip.
And it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build... Whoa.
It was released on May 15th. This edition was web-based, now coming with Internet Explorer for web browsing and Outlook. Microsoft, being a large company, got to ship Internet Explorer with Windows free of charge, with it having some under-the-hood differences, effectively drowning out the competition at the time. 98 may well seem just like 95, though the title bar could now be a gradient between two tones, and the File Explorer got navigation buttons and an address bar. Features also introduced included Disk Cleanup and Windows Update. The following year in May, Windows 98 SE or second edition was made available. This mainly came with bug fixes and device improvements again, such as better USB support. Internet Explorer was updated to 5.0 and DirectX to 6.1. Windows 98 was apparently praised for its fixes and continued improvements to the interface and ease of use. Then came the celebrations for the new millennium at a nice round number of year 2000. And of course there were new Windows releases. It started with the aptly named Windows 2000. While it was released to manufacturing before New Year's, the public release was ultimately on February 17th. This was part of the business-oriented NT line, bringing the new features from Windows 98 in addition to file system improvements, including encryption. Important system files would be protected by prohibiting modification to them, except for Windows Update software. Blue screens would automatically reboot the system to reduce downtime in servers. It was supposed to be the most secure and stable Windows yet, though it was hindered by some virus attacks. The same year, a new consumer-oriented Windows release was there too, of course, launched in September 14th. It's Windows ME, Windows Me, officially meaning Millennium Edition, but sometimes called the Mistake Edition or simply one of the worst operating systems. It was plagued with bugs and lack of hardware support, resulting in more issues and blue screens. Many people chose to stay on Windows 98 or use 2000 instead, never mind it being more directed towards commercial use. In fact, there was a lot of confusion between Windows ME and 2000. It did have new features though. For example, DOS mode was limited for stability and faster boot times. System Restore was added to let you roll back the system to a previous state for recovery. Updates can be checked for automatically. Support for compressed zip folders was added natively. Multimedia software was updated with Windows Movie Maker added. A big factor in Windows ME failing must have been that it didn't get the time to fully realize and maybe didn't really have a time and place. Like, there was a release 2 years before, which got updated 1 year before ME, with another major release in the following year. So there were probably time constraints and not as much focus on it. Mind you, it was still just like Windows 95 and based on MS-DOS, which was getting outdated. Windows 95, 98 and ME together would be known as the 9X series. That major release was codenamed Vista during development, but it ended up as we know it, Windows XP, released on October 25, 2001. This now unified the consumer and professional lines of Windows, bringing the NT kernel to the computers at home. The visuals were once again greatly revamped to be more colorful and welcoming, with a blue taskbar and window borders, the standout green start button, and a smooth 3D-ish look. It came with an iconic wallpaper of hills named Bliss. The start menu got a major update with programs on one column and folders and settings on the other one. I entered this world during the XP days, and this was the first OS I had experience with for a while. The appearance was criticized by some for looking like some kid's toy, to which I say, okay, so what? At this point they tried adding some desktop assistance. There is a dog when you go searching for files, and of course the most well known is a paperclip Clippy in Microsoft Office. They were added after Microsoft concluded that people respond to computers like they do to other humans. Take for example yelling at your computer screen, so there should be something more human-like there. Clippy got a lot of hate for interrupting users and getting in the way, but all this time it just wanted to help with no other hidden motives. In these simpler times, Clippy was just there to help. What also got heat in Windows XP was the copy protection anti-piracy system Windows Product Activation. This is where the requirement for that activation code was introduced. Without activating, Windows XP would just lock up, you wouldn't be able to use it. On the fateful day of December 31st, 2001, support ended for all legacy Windows editions, that is, Windows 95 and anything before it, all at once. This would make Windows 1 Windows the longest supported edition at 16 years. From here, there will be several editions based on each release of Windows, starting with Windows Server 2003. While XP was once again praised for significantly improved visuals and ease of use, there were concerns for security and performance at launch, prompting Microsoft to release 3 service packs over the years. The second one, released in 2004, introduced Security Center, Windows Firewall, and the compatibility mode for older software. Development for the next Windows was started while XP was still being finished up. Codenamed Longhorn, it was supposed to be a transitional release between XP and the major release codenamed Blackcomb. The development was not straightforward. The biggest features were supposed to be a new GUI framework and a storage platform named WinFS with faster search. The project grew bigger while not having a clear focus, before becoming a too ambitious one that wasn't going to work. As such, the project was completely reset in 2004. They settled for Vista as a name and started giving out betas of the system. It was released in January of 2007 to a harsh reception. Once again, high hardware requirements and stability issues were brought out. Some devices were marked as Vista compatible without really being that, and a lot of computers at that time were not ready for it. The cost of it was also seen as too high, and an annoyance to the users was user account control, which repeatedly got in the way and just kept popping up. The criticism caused many to stay on XP and some others to go along with the hate without trying it for themselves. It introduced a new graphical interface, Windows Aero, most notable for its see-through glass-like effects. The search capabilities were greatly improved. The games were rewritten with better graphics and new ones were introduced. Windows Update was now built into the operating system. multimedia applications got significant updates. You could now have widgets right on your desktop. After letting the hardware catch up and some fixes through service specs, Vista may have been a good operating system actually, though the damage to its reputation was pretty much done. Even more so, the next Windows release, Windows 7 from October 22nd, 2009, might not seem that different from Vista, and yet this one gets the glory as one of the greatest Windows releases. This is now what was supposed to be the Black Comb release. They made fixes on what Vista was criticized for and improved the arrow interface. Most notably, the glass effect is a little less black and the taskbar is improved, with more options for configuration and application pinning and grouping. Windows snapping was added, maximizing windows when dragged to the edge. One thing is the activation system becoming looser with each release. Windows 7 was already usable without activating it. After the trial period, you'd just simply not have a wallpaper and you might get some notifications about it not being activated, but that's about it. Also, you could still use the 90s theme of Windows on Windows 7, a sign of backwards compatibility and building new editions on top of previous ones. Anyway, this release was received warmly and is certainly my favorite operating system. When making the new edition, Microsoft noted the rise of phones and touch devices, hence Windows 8, released on October 26, 2012, was supposed to be touch-friendly. That backfired though, as it really disrupted and was a major departure from the desktop workflow. The iconic Start button was removed, confusing users. The Start menu was now full screen with large tiles. Navigation was now done using some swipe gestures. It included built-in apps in the Metro style, which were large and full screen, clearly meant for tablets. Windows is a desktop PC operating system, and 8 was just too much of a change. A year later, on October 17th, an updated edition called Windows 8.1 was released to a more positive reaction than 8. This came with improvements to the Start screen, including the return of the Start button in the corner and a tighter integration of the OneDrive Cloud service. On April 8, 2014, support for Windows XP ended, meaning no more security updates or fixes. This would leave the system outdated and vulnerable. Being 13 years after the release of XP, Microsoft had already given extra time to upgrade before pulling the plug, and yet numerous enterprises, also in the medical or banking field, were hesitant to update, citing lack of support for the specific cases on newer editions. I remember the default Microsoft antivirus giving its red computer alerts to signal the OS being unsupported. The successor to Windows 8.1 was Windows 10, released July 29, 2015. This marked the return of the familiar desktop interface of Windows, with the Start menu and desktop applications, while some of its tiles for Windows 8 were kept. Internet Explorer was replaced with Microsoft Edge as a web browser. Other features include Xbox integration, virtual desktops, and improved settings. Multi-factor authentication was introduced, in addition to support for logging in with fingerprint or face recognition. The use of a Microsoft account was starting to get pushed. While 10 was seen as a positive upgrade over 8, concerns were raised over the forced updates, adware in the OS, and privacy issues from data collection. The plain square look was also not really my taste. You might wonder, if we went from Windows 8 to 10, where is Windows 9 then? One theory is that the number was skipped to avoid confusion with the Windows 9X series from the 90s. Another one, which I used to like to think, is that maybe Windows 8.1 was a Windows 9 all along, but don't take my word for it. The most plausible is that Microsoft had promoted Windows 10 as the last edition of Windows, and they wanted to end on a nice round number. Windows 10 as a service would be updated continuously, with larger feature updates released twice a year. On January 14 of 2020, support ended for Windows 7 and 8, leaving those out of date and vulnerable as well. That marks the end for one of the greatest operating systems. In 2021, rumors and leaks started appearing about Windows 11, and I have a bit of a funny story with it. I had recently read about some Windows 9 pass around as some malware, so when I heard about Windows 11, knowing that 10 was supposed to be the last edition, I didn't believe them, passing it off as some hoax or another scam. But then, Windows 11 got officially announced by Microsoft and released on October 5. Its design featured rounded corners from XP to 7 days, along with floating menus and more transparency effects. Response to Windows 11 was mixed. At first, really not much seemed different from Windows 10 apart from the design, with even the boot menu still calling it Windows 10 when first released. The system requirements were significantly higher again, with UEFI, secure boot, and TPM 2.0 being a must. You would also have needed a relatively new processor. 32-bit support was ended completely, leaving Windows 11 usable on only 64-bit computers. The privacy concerns for Windows 10 were only amplified. Lack of customization held it back too. You cannot move the taskbar around, and the odd choice was made to have the start menu centered by default. The start menu itself and the right-click menus were also more limited. Windows 11 continues the Windows 10 update schedule with major updates released each autumn. In 2022, we got groups in the start menu and tabs in File Explorer. The 2024 update was all about adding AI, whether it is image effects, speech translation, or text rewriting. I actually find Windows 11 significantly more tempting over 10 for the updated visuals and new features, not the AI though. I do feel that the issues of 10, like spyware ads, pushing of Microsoft account, are made worse on 11. So we reach this year. Windows 11 has just recently overtaken 10 in its desktop usage, and support for Windows 10 is ending on October 14th, leaving Windows 11 as the only supported edition of Windows. This would be the first time since the beginning with Windows 1.0 to have only one supported Windows release at a time. By the way, I use Linux, so you can do that too. There aren't really any official announcements for Windows 12, but there are speculations. It might come with floating taskbar, it will likely be even more AI integrated, and might make more use of voice commands. If Microsoft keeps up releasing a new edition of Windows every 3 or 6 years, we could expect Windows 12 by 2027. Also, you know how the logo keeps getting simpler. It was colorful and wavy, then just a blue window, then literally just 4 squares. So will Windows 12 logo look like this then? That was a joke, but what if the logo gets rounded instead? That was a look at the different editions of Windows and how we got here. I guess happy anniversary to Windows 95. I am Median Lane. If you enjoyed, you can perhaps leave a like and subscribe, and see ya. Bye for now.